The entire Western world of gaming has imploded at this point. PlayStation, Xbox, it doesn't matter. The absolute state of modern gaming right now is hemorrhaging under the weight of bloated corporate failure and greed. At this point, what we're seeing is honestly a systemic collapse of all these major studios evaporating into the ether as if they never existed to begin with, and the future might belong to lean, uncompromising developers who not only respect their players but build games first and products second. And if that wasn't enough, you even have the RAM prices that are so out of control they're getting hit with lawsuits for effectively making console gaming borderline impossible to function in the future. So we're going to start with RAM, how it affects PlayStation, Xbox, and more, and then we're going to get into all the mass layoffs, how the industry is changing amidst everything and more. It's a lot to go over, I know, so let's jump in. Firstly, consoles like the PlayStation 6 and Xbox Helix are going to be ridiculously more expensive whenever they come out due to those RAM shortages. But now the people who control these prices are being hit with a class action lawsuit, thankfully. As Game Rant reported here, the lawsuit hitting these RAM manufacturers isn't even coming from consumers. It's actually the government that's suing them. Uh-oh, indeed, guys. Obviously, RAM memory chips are needed for everything. Phones, computers, you name it. Consoles, however, they live and breathe on these things. And that's why this is so important that this is finally happening. So this news originally comes from Law 360 as seen here. There's a California lawsuit that is currently being filed against Micron, Hynix, and Samsung for inflating the prices of memory on purpose, and it's causing everything to fall into chaos. As seen here, the lawsuit details that these companies have jumped the price by almost 700% since 2022, which has been, well, catastrophic. A PS5 now is more expensive than it was 6 years ago. That doesn't even make sense, but that's what's really happening. As they say it here, the increase has worked because these companies are making money over fist, but in turn, it's ruining the future of things like PlayStation 5s. And the eventual 6, right? Alongside what Xbox is dealing with right now too. As seen here, places like Apple have already increased the prices of their devices by 10 to 15% because of these costs. This Ramageddon is essentially ruining the future of technology in games too. In general, history is actually repeating itself, as they say here. Because in 1998, the American government actually sued Samsung and Hynix for trying to do the same thing even back then. Micron avoided the lawsuit because they snitched on the other two, and executives, they actually went to jail even. This apparently is what's leading Sony PlayStation to force a digital future, as WCCF Tech reported here. The idea is that Sony believes the future of games is going to get so expensive then that they need to find a way to not only make a profit, but also seem desirable and affordable enough for people to buy into in the first place. The PS6 is currently, according to reports, costing Sony over $1,000 American to just create a single PS6 unit, which obviously that isn't ideal, considering the PS5 was half that price in 2020 when it first released. This leak for the PS6 is coming from Kepler_L2, who has leaked a ton about Sony in the past accurately. As Kepler said here, the goal was to remove physical discs for PlayStation 6 because the cost of making the new consoles and then some is going to be impossible to manage with how expensive things are. As they say here, removing discs is more about making the transition to the console plus handheld model easier and ensuring higher game revenue with higher ASPs, average selling prices, and no game reselling, possibly to offset the higher hardware costs. I'm not defending Sony here, I'm just telling you what's happening, but WFFC Tech also further detailed in this article here that you can see that a former Naughty Dog developer stated that the PlayStation 6 and the Xbox Helix and the reality of how much these things are going to cost will not lead to better games being made, but instead more layoffs, which I do agree with. I don't think any of this is healthy, and it's no surprise that these three memory chip companies are now being sued by the American government, because the Rampocalypse we find ourselves in is largely created by those companies artificially inflating their prices. Because they know they're some of the only sources for these chips pretty much around the world. So these companies, Sony, Microsoft, Apple, whoever they are kind of forced to play by their rules. But the problem is that the costs are being pushed to us as customers, which doesn't help anything. And I personally think that this will be a disaster for PlayStation and Xbox specifically. Because if nobody can afford your console at a reasonable amount, how are you going to convince developers to make PS6 only games, right? If the player base can't even show up because it costs too much to buy in. This is why apparently Sony wants to go all in digital, to remove as much cost as possible to streamline everything, but it doesn't make things right either way. It just means that we, as consumers, are still going to have less power in the end of this all. So again, not defending Sony because no way, dude. But as seen here in March 2026, PlayStation 6 allegedly cannot afford to delay any longer for a full release. They have to come out in 2027 at the latest. The reason is simple. The longer the delay, the more everything costs. The other reason being is that Sony already has a contract with TSMC, or Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. They're the largest independent semiconductor foundry in the world, and if Sony doesn't do well on their release, they could set them back years in terms of having priority in the future. That, alongside the fact that the PS6, according to leaked specs, will have a rasterization performance somewhere close to around 3 times what the PS5 can achieve right now. And I know, I'm sure not everyone watching this knows what that even means, so this is how Google puts it, okay? Rasterization performance is the speed at which your graphics card, GPU, converts 3D vector graphics into a 2D image made of pixels. It is a highly optimized real-time rendering method that measures how many frames per second a system can push in standard video games. So your FPS and all of that is going to be about 3 times as fast on the PS6 compared to what it is right now on the PS5. But because of that, Sony needs those chips, right? And this is why the lawsuit is important. Because if these companies fail to defend their cases for a 700% increase in prices, we're all going to benefit. So then you have the Orion, which, if you don't know, that's the code name for the PS6, and Sony also plans to launch a handheld Steam Deck-like device for the Orion that is currently called codenamed Canis. So the Canis handheld, obviously not its real name, probably PlayStation Portal 2 or something, I don't know. It will apparently have full backwards compatibility with PS4 and PS5 games alongside the 6, obviously. It'll also have haptic feedback, dual microphones, a touchscreen like the PS Vita has, and also micro SD and M.2 SSD storage support as well. Allegedly, the Canis handheld will outperform the Xbox Ally, which is currently Microsoft's handheld. The price is targeted for the Canis handheld is somewhere between $400 to $500 American right now, which, if that ends up being the case, that would likely sell like hotcakes, right? The other rumor is Microsoft wants to get their console, the Xbox Helix, out before Sony's PS6 even hits store shelves. The idea is to have a repeat of the Xbox 360 era, where people adopt the console before Sony's comes out so they can establish market dominance earlier. And the reason why we want this lawsuit to go through is simple, because it's seen here, right? Samsung, who's being sued by the US government, is still trying to increase the prices of things needed for these consoles and PCs by insane amounts quarter by quarter. If Samsung is allowed to get away with this, that Canis handheld is not going to be $400 to $500 American. That thing's going to be like $800 to $1,000 American if Samsung gets their way, which is why this lawsuit is happening the way that it is, and I pray that it goes through. Samsung, despite those lawsuits that threaten all of modern gaming prices, is still trying to raise their prices by 20% per quarter, which you don't need to be a math whiz to know that's clinically crazy to do. As seen here, Samsung has already raised DRAM prices by 90% in a single quarter in 2026, and they want to go even further. This is why, if you love video games and want them to succeed, you want this lawsuit to go in favor of the government, unironically, because this cannot stand. Game Rant had more info on that lawsuit as seen here where I highlighted. The plaintiffs, represented by the New York-based Bathy Dunn LLP, accused the companies of violating multiple laws across several states, including the Sherman Act, Cartwright Act, and Minnesota's antitrust law. The plaintiffs are seeking injunctive relief in order to remedy the effects of the defendants' unlawful and anti-competitive conduct. Game Rant continues, the federal RAM lawsuit goes into more detail about how the 3 named defendants have cornered the market on RAM production. The lawsuit alleges that the process of making unusable RAM chips has been protected by decades of trade secrets, and that export controls in the United States prohibit other means. So they got everyone by the balls, is what they're trying to say, but in a nicer, more professional way, pretty much. If it was up to these companies, we would all be paying entire months worth of rent for a single console, and they really wouldn't care. I'm halfway convinced the reason Sony tried to axe their whole physical media thing has to do with the whole combating these other companies' prices in order to somehow survive amidst all of this. Still, even then, I'm not going to defend Sony, obviously, but the point stands that all of this is imploding because of greed. Every facet of that word, greed, is the root cause of everything here. The shortage on this RAM thing could last until 2030, which would be 3 years after the PS6, Canis handheld, and Xbox Helix would launch. And at that point, what state would modern gaming even be in if these prices are allowed to reign supreme, right? Even the Steam machine has blown up in cost despite not being worth the price that Valve is asking for. But at this point, if this lawsuit doesn't go through and win, these greedy companies are going to ruin everything, and we're all going down with them. Oh boy, okay, that's the lawsuit part of the video. Now let's get into the layoffs, the absolute state of the AAA industry, and all of that. This video is stuffed, man. All right. Alright, as you already likely know as PC Gamer showed here, Xbox had mass layoffs which we knew were coming, but they were brutal all the same. 3,200 people were laid off, entire development studios lay gutted and left in abysmal shape following the bloodbath that Microsoft's new head of Xbox, Asha Sharma, believed that this was all the right call because Xbox, in her opinion, is not healthy. IGN, for example, as you can see here, says shedding talent will not be the cure for Xbox or AAA games in general. And this is partly true, but it depends on which studio we're talking about in all honesty. A lot of things happen, right? Double Fine somehow survived being closed down and they will now go independent, likely so they can continue making games for nobody. Ninja Theory also got funding somewhere else and will now spin off to finish their Senua game, which is quite literally their last chance because if that game does not perform, they are also doomed. Even Obsidian had layoffs, which didn't surprise me one bit considering their last two games, Avowed and The Outer Worlds 2, both flopped. But it was good to find out at least that Matt Hansen, the art director, which is this guy on screen here, was confirmed to have been laid off during this bloodbath by Chris Avallone, as you can see here on Twitter, which made a lot of people happy because Avowed's art director was someone who openly praised how he didn't want to hire white developers and prioritize black developers instead. As Matt Hansen infamously said on Blue Sky just a year ago, as you can see here, reminder to black artists out there who are looking for portfolio reviews or job advice, my DMs are open and you will always have my priority. We got too many crusty white dudes in this field. Please let me help you replace me one day. I want to go back to living in the woods. Well, I guess Matt got his wish. Not the replacement part, but he can live in the woods at least. But people like this, they were everywhere in these layoffs, right? The usual types, I mean. The self-defeated white savior type of game developers who ruined games because they believed that they were being righteous in their actions, when in reality, all they did was ruin everything that they touched. Like, for example, here's a collection of characters from The Outer Worlds 2 and Avowed. Gee, I can't imagine why these games flopped. How could nobody want to play these slop-induced games? Layoffs at Obsidian? That's crazy. According to Bloomberg, the Xbox situation, when it comes to how poorly they are doing, it turns out a lot of these companies that they bought were making Microsoft basically zero money for a very long time. It actually got so bad that, as Charlie Intel reported here via Bloomberg as well, apparently Minecraft was actually what Microsoft was using to keep the entire Xbox division afloat. All the money generated there, right? Being used to keep places like Obsidian of all things going. Which, I guess that makes sense to me, but also proves that clearly a lot of these development studios, and I know they're going to hate me for saying this, but someone has to, but these studios were clearly not making games for the players, they were just making them for themselves. It has also been confirmed, as Insider Gaming showed here, that Asha Sharma has now forced Obsidian to stop making Avowed 2 and to now focus entirely on a new Fallout game, which will have the original director of Fallout New Vegas, who still works at Obsidian. Now, does that mean the next Fallout game will immediately be amazing? I would not hold my breath, to be honest. However, what this entire nonsense situation tells me is one thing which I hate being right about. As this user here said, it's actually crazy that Asha Sharma had to step in and redirect Obsidian from Avowed 2 to prioritize a new Fallout game. But these studios just not listen to what fans actually want. Unironically, yes, they do not listen. Because clearly, Obsidian, after Avowed failed commercially, believed that it was in their best interest to instead develop a sequel to a game clearly nobody embraced in any meaningful way. This is why, whenever I see some developer on Twitter or whatever say we need to let developers make the games they want to make, it's almost always modern nonsense that nobody would buy even at a discounted price point. The fact that Double Fine almost got shut down is a good example of this. Their games are made for Double Fine employees first. Because if you look at their newest games over the past few years, they have abysmal player numbers, and I can only imagine that they, alongside Obsidian and so many others, just wasted Microsoft's time and money for years making slop that no one would play anyways. If that wasn't the case, there wouldn't be layoffs and all of these bloodbaths, but hey, it is what it is. It also begs the question, what were, Microsoft studios allowing to make the slop they did for so long in the first place? Where was the creative control? Why wasn't Microsoft forcing these development studios to make games that would actually be popular and good? It really doesn't make much sense to me. You buy and spend billions acquiring all of these studios to make your first party offering stronger. You now own IPs like Fallout, for crying out loud. Not only that, but you also own the development studios that made Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and New Vegas under your belt too. But you never once thought to yourself, maybe we should get these teams who understand this obviously very popular IP and then get them to make the next Fallout game for us to generate revenue and bring Xbox back from the brink of destruction maybe. Nope, instead Bethesda's going to make Starfield, which at this point is never going to get a sequel because it's awful, and they worked on Fallout 76, instead a live service game that no one asked for. And Obsidian will prioritize Girl Boss Outer Worlds 2 and Slop Like Avowed, where none of the NPCs even move in the game's city. Everyone just stands still. Which, once you see that in Avowed, you will not be able to unsee it. It's ridiculous. We should have had at least 2 new actual Fallout single-player games by now from these studios. Instead, Microsoft just allowed them to make whatever they wanted, right? Listen to the devs, obviously. Which is why you got slop games that nobody bought in meaningful amounts or cared about in any way that actually mattered. Maybe I'm crazy, but if I spent billions buying the Fallout IP, I wouldn't be letting that IP rot in obscurity for years. I would be immediately pushing whoever I had to make new Fallout games, and now apparently that's what Microsoft is trying to do. As IGN reported here, Asha Sharma confirmed that's the plan. She wants to force Microsoft's core studios to make hit games based on their most valuable IPs only. I can't even speak. How is this even irrelevant? You should have been doing this to begin with. What are we doing? Anyways, so this means that a heavy focus on Fallout, Elder Scrolls, Wolfenstein, and the like, yeah, that makes sense to me. That's what you should have been doing in the first place. You know, games people actually want to play instead of whatever Double Fine was doing for the past 5 years. Anyways, these layoffs resulted in 1/5 of Xbox in totality being gutted, as Insider Gaming reported here. Even at Fallout 76 that might end up stopping altogether without help from external studios, which got gutted during the layoffs as well. IGN actually spoke to an anonymous employee who works at Bethesda, who told them, as you can see there, that Microsoft is now forcing Bethesda to train up contractors to become familiar with how Bethesda makes their games. Which is another big reason I think the entire AAA gaming bubble is popping, because not only is Xbox cooked right now, but they're not even fostering the studios that they own anyways. They're just outsourcing the development because it's cheaper. But the reason why anyone likes the games that Bethesda, for example, makes is because there's institutional knowledge at these companies that lead to these games being made the way that they should be. However, in my opinion, the AAA industry is so mismanaged at this point, well, the Western one anyways, that a large swath of that knowledge has already left the industry behind years ago. It's gone. And based on what Bethesda has been doing for years now, it's pretty obvious most of the heavy hitters that made those games amazing like Skyrim or Oblivion, they're probably not there anyways. Everything on Xbox and AAA in general just feels like the ship of Theseus over and over again, right? The ship has the same name as a studio you like, but the people who work there aren't really there anymore. So is that even Bethesda anymore, or Obsidian, or any one of these people? The only studio getting gutted that confused me was id Software, the makers of Doom, as Video Games Chronicle reported here. Id at this point has been relegated to a support studio as they lost half of their team during these layoffs. 96 workers in Texas were laid off, and another 40 remote workers were also laid off at id too. Derek Best, a VFX artist at id, posted about how bad the layoffs were, where he said this: collectively, decades of knowledge was wiped out of the studio. The VFX team was eliminated down to one single artist with no lead or producer. The engine programmer responsible for the massive games in VFX pipeline improvements, like all the particle editor work, was let go as well. He continued, all devs that had Houdini knowledge for procedural modeling or cached animations were wiped out, so all the work for Doom the Dark Ages in that program has gone to waste with no one to carry it on. And then he concluded with this: great job, Microsoft. Nothing says business success like nuking a team into the dirt and relegating them to support studio size, while also throwing out massive technological achievements. As they said here, the future for id Software is a push to use Unreal Engine, which is baffling, dude, to me, because it's largely considered, okay, that id Software, in case you don't know, has actually created one of the best engines to make games with in the entire industry already, right? Which they made in-house, by the way. So pushing id, of all people, to make games in Unreal, that, oh my god, man, that tells me everything I need to know, okay? Some people might think, wow, this means Xbox is gonna come back, right guys? PlayStation and Nintendo's days are numbered. Well, no, not exactly. What Microsoft has done is remove a lot of bloat. Yes, we know that. But they also removed a ton of institutional knowledge from their workplaces, where people that actually knew what they were doing, like in id Software, are being let go. Pushing all of these studios to Unreal Engine is also the biggest FU slopfest too. If you haven't noticed, practically every single modern AAA game these days, well, most of them anyways, are being made in Unreal Engine. Like almost all of them, not even kidding. So why would you do that, right? Simple. So the big publishers can plug the gaps and use contract work to finish any game they're making so they can ship it out the window. This is another big reason why AAA Western gaming has faltered too, because the DNA of studios don't feel as important for the most part. Because the vast majority of these games are being made by giant groups of people who are not actually a part of these studios or share in their collective DNA. You kind of have to think of game studios like a nation that is homogenous, okay? The more that game studio stays what they originally are, the more likely the games being made in the future will be like what they've already done. Because the DNA is shared across the studio and its culture, everything. It's very one-sided. And that's kind of how it used to be, right? But once they started introducing outside workers who don't have the DNA and weren't there from the get-go, you start to notice the games from the same studios begin to change. Xbox, obviously, is a big believer in contract work, but for them, it's kind of gotten ridiculous. For example, the entire Halo Campaign Evolved game is practically made by contractors over actual Halo devs at 343 or Halo Studios, whatever they're called now. And the other reason why id Software would now move to Unreal is because of that too. If everyone works on the same engine, Unreal in this case, then every contractor can work on every game because everyone is familiar with the same technology. It's a good theory on paper. However, the problem is that Unreal's strengths may be one thing, but like how it uses, for example, Lumen Tech for lighting or Nanite for geometry, but this also means that every game, regardless of what genre it is also going to now have the same setbacks too. Unreal Engine has problems and weaknesses too, right? For example, it has a steep learning curve to use in the first place. It also has a very large strain on system memory and storage. The complexity of C++ is also a problem, and of course the fact that Epic Games, the people who own Fortnite, made Unreal Engine, well, they're now going to get a flat 5% royalty fee on any game that uses their engine, which is practically everyone now in the Western game sphere pretty much. So Epic is making a lot of money off every game that sells practically now. Witcher 4, for example, is using Unreal Engine now over the Red Engine. Red Engine was that CDPR used for Witcher 2, 3, and Cyberpunk. Why did they change that? It's simple. Contractor work, guys. It will be easier to get outside help for an engine that contractors already know how to use over an in-house engine with Red, but this also leads to drawbacks too, because it means Witcher 4, for example, will suffer the same problems as other Unreal games. Whereas Red Engine was created, it focused on seamless open worlds to make dense environments work well, and it also allowed for very little loading screens. Red Engine in, say, Witcher 3 or Cyberpunk was also impressive because whereas most engines were built for physics and the like, CD Projekt Red built their in-house engine for the single sole purpose of making massive RPG games instead. This included branching dialogue paths and stuff like creating real player choice, not to mention Red Engine was big for high fidelity lighting. And Red Engine also allowed for very good character facial expressions and the like too, but it didn't matter because now everyone's using Unreal because it's universal. But it also means that these games are now losing the uniqueness to how they felt to play as a result too. Does this mean that Witcher 4 is going to suck? No, but it does mean it will definitely feel a lot different than, say, Witcher 3 and how that game worked at its core. That's kind of the point. It feels as though games are trying to become multi-developed or multicultural, if you will, as an example, over adhering and building upon what made them unique in the first place, if that makes sense. But that's where the industry is going Western-wise. Do I think it's a good thing? Yeah, half and half, I guess. Some games do well and work fine on Unreal, like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, for example. It's also a big reason why Revelation, the third game, took about 3 years to develop for Square, because 95% of their developers from Rebirth stayed on Revelation, so the seamless transition led to smooth development. Other games were technical messes, though, at release on Unreal Engine, though, like Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which ran terribly on PC at launch. Wasn't really that great on PS5 either. The Callisto Protocol also ran horribly at launch on PC, as did Gotham Knights, Redfall, and more. Either way, the entire state of gaming right now is in flux, right? The RAM prices are out of whack, game consoles are becoming unaffordable, lawsuits are happening, tons of Western game developers are being laid off, and everything seems to be on fire. Don't you love it here? Isn't it great? You know what's weird though? Eastern companies are seemingly doing fine. As Automaton.com reported here, Koei Tecmo, the people behind Dynasty Warriors, Ninja Gaiden, Atelier, Neo, and then some, have actually been adding more developers in recent years rather than losing them, right? Koei Tecmo has now reached 3,000 developers, and they still plan to add another 2,000 in the next coming years. The reason's simple. They're actually making games that people want to buy and play. I love Koei Tecmo games because they're just video games. They don't bludgeon me over the head with stupid nonsense, and they just let me have fun in their worlds. Wow, what a novel concept, isn't that? But that's what I mean. While the West is on fire, losing devs by the boatloads, the East is still doing great. I know people will blame costs and whatnot, but I really do think it comes down to leadership and actually making things that people want to buy and play. Xbox is learning the hard way, so is Sony, with their first-party games selling less and less as time goes on too. The strength that the East has right now is kind of undeniable, but none of this will matter if RAM prices continue to become so expensive that only Tony Stark can afford them in due time. So, has the Western gaming bubble popped? Oh yeah, dude, it's popped, exploded, imploded, whatever buzzword you want to use. I still think there is a bright future in there somewhere. I haven't given up hope, but my hope mostly lies with the East and their games games over the West. Clearly, if the West continues to flounder their games and fans like they have for so long, eventually there just won't even be a Western games industry. There's nowhere for those devs to even go. It's not like most of them even speak Japanese or Chinese anyways. But if things continue the way that they are, eventually the Western industry might just disappear. I would feel sorry for them, but if they keep making things that nobody wants, I mean, what do you expect, right? This video's probably long enough. But there's a lot here to chew on, okay? So let me know what you think as always. Thanks for being here. Subscribe if you'd like to. I got plenty of things to come, so I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care of yourselves. Go enjoy some cool games. Things might sound dire, but remember to have fun first always. Just go play some games, okay? You earned it.